Highly anticipated bout since Mayweather-Pacquiao. I'm sure this is going to be incredibly entertaining for all of us. The way this is going to work, we're going to allow each candidate to briefly introduce themselves for around 5 minutes, and then we are going to immediately open the floor to any questions. So simply raise your hand, and if I deem you good looking enough, I will ask you to put forward your question. So, well, without further ado, we'll get started. First we have Daniel Coleman.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Of course, I'm at University, second year law student in the law school, law department, soon I think that will change too. So thank you for inviting me. I'm obviously here to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats, which is a difficult thing to do when you're in a student's university after our past 5 years of government. I would start off with what we have done in Parliament. Actually, there's a bit more to it than what the President let you think. Firstly, actually, we promised a few things and we delivered on 75% of our manifesto. Now, that's not that bad when you're the junior partner of a coalition. We've only got 57 members of Parliament compared to the 300 and something that the Conservatives have got. That's pretty good. What we did promise on was to make a £10,000 of your earnings tax-free, the first £10,000. Actually, that's going to be £10,600. That's we've actually went forward on our promises. And if we put back into Parliament, we'll make that £12,500, giving you another £400 in your pocket to spend when you see fit. We had our policy, this is ours, not the Conservatives if they what you believe, the triple lock on pensions. Our triple lock on state pensions means it will always rise with state inflation, earnings or 2.5%, whichever's highest. This new system has meant that pensioners will be able to receive the biggest cash increase that they have ever, now worth an extra £650 to them since Labour. We've also had the pupil premium. Yes, I know that's in England, but because of the Barnum formula, which I will vote to protect, I will never vote to get rid of the Barnum formula, it can be done in Scotland as well. We've not yet seen it. I hope to say we will someday. We've stopped many Conservative policies. Running schools for profit, fire at will for bosses, inheritance tax cuts for millionaires. The Conservatives plan to give a cut to the super rich at £27,000 inheritance tax. We have blocked this proposal, and instead we actually gave ordinary workers a £700 income tax. Now I'm going to tackle this issue head on. There's no point in hiding for it in tuition fees. I know exactly how you feel. I just want to say that if elected as Member of Parliament, I can give you a solemn pledge. I was not a member of the party when this happened. I never signed any pledges, but I will never vote to increase tuition fees. I come here for free. It's such a great privilege. I will never put debt onto somebody else's shoulder. I will always 100% continue to support the free tuition in Scotland and across the whole United Kingdom. The thing is, we're in coalition. We can't have everything we want. You've got to give and take. It's like a marriage. I appreciate it was a big thing, but it wasn't one of our red lines back then, and that does not mean it's acceptable. But as I say, in a coalition, we delivered 75% of the manifesto, despite being the smaller. You might hear from other parties really criticising my party for the stance on tuition fees, but you've got to look at some of the other parties. You've got to look at Labour's note in the Treasury when we walked in. There's no money. And goodness me, that's not any good. In 1997, Labour said we will not introduce tuition fees. They said in 2001 we will not top them up. And I'm pretty sure it's happened. There has been a red line issued for Nick Clegg in this election, and you could quote me on this. If we are stupid enough to break another promise on education, I will leave the Liberal Democrats. There's no doubt about it. I cannot defend the second broken promise. You could quote me on that in 6 months' time, when hopefully we're back into the coalition government. And north of the border, our record on tuition fees is actually quite good. It was the Lib Dem Labour Scottish Executive, as it was then, following the evolution that abolished tuition fees. We replaced tuition fees with the graduate endowment. Labour want to take credit for that, but it was us twisting their arms putting that through Parliament in Holyrood. The endowment system itself no longer exists. It was the SNP government, then in 2007, I think, or 2008, that they were a minority and relied on the backing of the Liberal Democrats to get rid of the graduate endowment, so that now tuition fees are completely gone in Scotland. And I've always voted to do that. And we have continually voted in recent months with the SNP in Holyrood to affirm our commitment. And now we've got a promise of more if you put us back into Parliament, into the coalition. Balance the books fairly, keeping us in the middle. We don't want to lurch left, we don't want to lurch right. We'll balance the books fairly by 2017-18. We will raise the tax-free limits to £12,500. The NHS, we have guaranteed an extra £8 billion for that in England, which means there will be an extra £800 million for Scotland. In the budget overall, that can go to the National Health Service, which, by the way, we will never vote to privatise. It's such a vital public service. And even more, it's not just the Green Party that will do this. We will protect the environment as well, with our 5 green laws: Nature Act, Resource Efficiency and Zero Waste Act, a Green Buildings Act, Green Transport Act, and a Zero Carbon Britain Act. That is what we'll do. With the Liberal Democrats, what you've got is simple: taxes down, pensions up, more jobs, better healthcare, and a stronger Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Michael Marra.
Good evening, and thanks for having me along. I'm the Scottish Labour candidate in Dundee West. It's a pleasure to be here. I work at the university. I'm actually in DJ CAD along the road, but quite unusually for there, actually, I'm an economist. I run a research project into economic development, helping businesses grow, create new jobs, and that's my background. I worked for a few years for Oxfam, and worked in Scotland as head of policy, and also in Southern Africa working on HIV projects. Done various other things, but I am standing here sitting here tonight, asking for your support for Scottish Labour in this election, and there's a few reasons why I want to do that. I think that I want to start talking about Dundee first, and that's what I would always do, put Dundee first. I believe that locally we have a pretty scurrilous attack on education in this city at the moment. We're closing one of our high schools and causing overcrowding in our other schools across the city. And we just saw in the last 24 hours that once again we're at the bottom of the league tables for attainment in this country. We have been there for around about a decade, and we actually need to be investing in our education, improving education, rather than attacking it. And as I've gone speaking to people around the city over the last few weeks, I was just selected 3 weeks past Monday when the sitting MP, as he was, stood down on grounds of ill health. So it's a lot of work in these few weeks to try and get around and speak to as many people and understand where they are. And the major refrain really is about jobs. So people are really concerned about the unemployment rate in this city. They're worried that those who are in work don't get enough hours. They're worried that for the hours that they do work, they don't get paid enough. And we know again that it's not an economy, certainly in this city and I believe across the country, that works for working people. We need to change the kind of economy that we have across Britain. But we need urgent action in Dundee. So in the last 24 hours I've published a plan for jobs, based partly on my own research, my own work here in the university, but my experience of working in Dundee on building sites and pubs and call centres as a lorry loader over many years since I was a teenager in this city. As I say, I think that on a national level we need to change the kind of economy we have. We need to have radical action in terms of increasing the minimum wage. We need to outlaw exploitative zero-hour contracts. Some of the people in here, I know for some people zero-hour contracts actually work, because for students that they can add or provide a little bit of flexibility. Not for everybody by any means, because the number of people I've spoken to actually who tell me that they've had text messages the night before to say that there's no hours the next day, and they've got to put food on the table for their kids. They've got to be able to plan their lives, how they're going to pay their rent, and that kind of thing just has to stop. And we have to make sure that it stops, and we have to take legislative action to ensure that it stops. I don't think we have to consult big business on that, as some of the other parties have been saying that we should. I think actually we should take action, and we should do it soon. I think the Labour government, if we get one, is going to take action in the first 100 days to make sure that that's the case. We've said that across the 5 years of this Parliament, as it will be, that we need to balance the books. I think that's the right thing to do. We have to make sure that we can, over time, get the deficit down, and we have to then start tackling the debt that we have in this country. I think that we do that, making sure that we have progressive taxes at the same time, so that we can invest in our public services. So we're talking about a mansion tax, a tax on bankers' bonuses, a 50p tax rate, all lined and actually committed to specific progressive policies and how we can invest in childcare and education and our NHS to make sure that actually when we have to protect public services, the people who have the most pay that little bit more to make sure that we can make that investment for everyone. So I think the first step in that is getting rid of this Tory government. Now, some of you have seen the opinion polls today. I think most people in the room have probably got an active interest in politics. And we know that actually 4 opinion polls in the last 24 hours have put the Tories in a position where they'll be the biggest party. Scotland holds the key in this election at the moment, and that's a very powerful place to be for Scotland. But at the moment, what we're doing is locking in a Tory government, and I don't think that's what Scotland needs. It's certainly not what Dundee needs. So I think a vote for Labour is a vote for a fairer economy and with values at its heart, and that's why I'd ask you to give us your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Chris Law, SNP.
Good evening, everyone. It's a really exciting time, 7 days before the polls, and obviously here tonight to hear some exciting replies to some of your questions. What's really exciting about this particular election is 2 things. First of all, it's on the back of a referendum which really put Scotland alive. Everybody was heavily engaged. And actually a poll just came out last week which showed that between 18 and 24-year-olds, over 80% is expected to vote in Scotland, which is incredible. If you compare that with the numbers down in England, which is 17%, it really says how much we're involved in the democratic process. And Michael's brought up a very excellent point. Scotland does hold the balance and the way we go forward in this West Coast election. And one of the key reasons for voting for the SNP in this general election is to have the strongest voice for Scotland, because for far too long now, for decades, it has been ignored, and now it's woken up and it's in your hands, both in this election and how we go forward. Some of the key things about the SNP that are key for this particular election. The first thing is the major parties that are sitting here, the Conservatives, Labour and the Lib Dems, have signed up to further austerity. If you don't know what that is, it's a result of decades long of failed economic policies, and they're asking you and I to pick up the tab for big mistakes that are made by closing up the big business in Westminster and throughout Europe and America. It's been a global problem and we're expected to pick up the tab. Now, if you want to know how much that's going to cost, that's a further 30 billion on the 70 billion that we've already had in the last 5 years, and it will affect all areas of our society, including education. Now, what the SNP has proposed is an alternative to austerity. It's already been proven to fail to work, and all the economic indicators that are put forward by George Osborne and by Danny Alexander in 2010, both in reducing UK national debt and the deficit, it has completely failed. And that tab has been picked up by the 10% most vulnerable in our society. It's a cut to our welfare benefits, it's a cut to our healthcare, our education, our housing budgets, it'll be a cut to our local government, and therefore that is tearing apart our social fabric of our society. So what we've said in the SNP is that we'll actually increase by 0.5% GDP, which is a very small part of borrowing, public borrowing, which will still allow the deficit to fall, but it will allow £140 billion for infrastructure, for jobs and for innovation in universities such as this, which is leading in the world in life sciences. The second thing I need to say is also Trident. We have an opportunity for the first time in our lives to say no to renewing Trident. £100 billion is the estimated cost over the next 30 years. That's £3 billion over the first 10 years and £4 over the next 20 years after that. All the major parties have agreed to that. It's time to put bairns before bonds. The idea of spending £100 billion, as it was described to me by a Tory candidate just a week ago, as a weapon of mass protection, is absolutely ludicrous in this day and age. If anybody's read the book about Hiroshima, you'll get a sense of what it really costs at the human level as well as at the economic level. Third thing also is that we just came through a very exciting referendum. It was a very narrow referendum at the end of the day. 45% voted yes and 55% voted no. Now we accept that. But in a recent poll just a couple of months ago, almost 70% want to see real powers brought to Scotland, not the kind of stuff that came out just after the referendum under the Smith Commission, which is a completely watered down affair. Now we were told there would be a vow that was on the front of the Daily Record. There was a promise of home rule. Home rule is Devo Max. That is all powers minus foreign affairs and defence. Yet what happened with the Smith Commission was, once again, your major parties got around the table, along with the SNP, then it got sent down to London, it got watered down, and what we got back was very little. This is not home rule, it's Westminster rule, where 85% of taxes, 70% of taxes and 85% of welfare will continue in London. Therefore, I urge you to vote SNP to have the strongest voice in Scotland, in London, so I'll be your Dundee man in Westminster, not your Westminster man in Dundee. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, for the Conservatives, we have Nicola Ross.
Hello, I'm a graduate of this university, so many clean jobbers, so I know what a brilliant institution of children studying. 5 years ago, the country was on the bridge collapse. Labour left it as the letter to the Secretary said, with no money. The Conservatives turned this around despite the Labour Party saying that our policies wouldn't work and would create 4 million in jobs. We've actually created 2 million in jobs, and there's more working people now than there ever has been. This is a very important election we face. The choice is clear: a Conservative government that will keep our economy on track and provide security for our families, businesses and the country. Or we have an Edinburgh government propped up by the SNP. Scottish Conservative Party is proud of our record. We're proud that we stood up for the Union in last year's independence referendum. Unlike Labour, who are running away from the partnership, the Lib Dem voted collapsed, and as Conservatives are the only functioning Unionist Socialist Party. There's a number of criticisms that have arisen so far about privatisation in the NHS, which is a load of nonsense by Labour and the SNP. It was actually a Conservative MP in the MD that was partly responsible for the founding of the NHS. We've done more tax avoidance, and unlike Labour, we turned a blind eye. That is why I'm here this evening to put forward the case for voting a Conservative government come the 8th of May next week.
Thank you. Now we have Pauline Hinchion for the Green Party.
Hi, my name is Pauline Hinchion. I'm the co-convener here of the Dundee Green Party, and in my full-time job I'm actually helping to establish a new social bank for Scotland, because I think the 6 big banks haven't done us any favours, and indeed the speculative behaviour of the 6 big banks has resulted in austerity that's impacting on all of us and some of our most disadvantaged communities. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about our 3 manifesto pledges. I'm going to put it within the context of the wider green thinking, because I want people to realise that our ideas and our manifesto pledges come from what we believe in and comes from our policies. As a Green, you hear me okay now? I've pushed it down too low. As a Green, you know, there's a connection between people and the planet. We rely on our planet for everything that we have, for our housing, for our food, for our clothing, for everything. And we only have one planet. And it's exactly because we only have one planet that we need to make sure that the resources within the planet are distributed equally. Right now, our economic system benefits the 1%. And these 1% exploit people with zero-hour contracts and with in-work poverty, and exploit the planet with fracking and illegal logging and mining in order to maximise their access to even more of the resources, leaving less for the rest of us. Now, this is just not right, because our life chances, when we die, what type of life we live, what type of work we're in, all of these things are determined by how much inequality is in our society. So within the backdrop of that, you know, the Greens don't think it's particularly radical to ask for a £10 minimum wage. If you work and do a day's job, you should get a proper pay, and you should actually be able to live on the pay that you get. And when you think that we live in the richest, the 6th richest economy in the world, I just don't think that that's particularly radical, quite frankly. I think it's just absolutely our right to demand a wage that we can live in. And when we talk about the 1%, we're also talking about who owns and controls things. And when you look at our public services, we pay for those public services. We should be able to use them freely, but we also should be able to control them, and we should get the benefits from them. Between 2010 and 2015, the East Coast Rail Line was nationalised. And actually, during those 5 years, it put £1 billion back into the UK exchequer. £1 billion. Now, at a time of austerity, I don't think we can sneeze at that. I think that's a lot of money to be putting back in to allow us to deliver public services. But guess what? It's just been national. It's just been privatised again. So we're back in that scenario where those type of profits are going to continue. It's actually going to be the richest 1% that are once again going to benefit. And it's exactly because we're concerned about privatisation that we're very much involved in stopping TTIP, because we do see that as being a way of allowing the privatisation of our public services, not just our NHS, but all of our public services. And finally, we actually believe in a more radically democratic society. And we don't just mean politically, we also mean across all other areas of our lives. The Green Party was heavily involved in the independence referendum. We were very much in favour of a yes. We didn't come at it from a nationalist point of view. We did come at it from a democratic point of view, and trying to move democracy and decision-making closer to people. But we're not just talking about political democracy. We're talking about allowing fans to have control and, if necessary, ownership of their clubs. We're actually talking about a genuinely renewable energy-owning democracy. We're talking about employees being given the opportunity, if they want to buy out companies if those companies are going to be sold. That's what we mean by radical democracy. So when you vote Green, you're voting for an end to in-work poverty, you're voting to keep public services in public hands, and you're certainly voting for more control to communities who are most affected by decisions that are made on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally we have Jim McFarlane of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition.
Thanks very much, folks, first of all for the invite. And just to let you know, my name's Jim McFarlane from the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition. We're a new formation that's come together over the last years because, in our opinion, we need ordinary political representatives, not career politicians representing ordinary working class people. And we're standing to oppose all the cuts because we don't accept the argument that there is a need for cuts. The idea of economic austerity is clearly a political choice, it's not an economic necessity. And we think it's a disgrace that ordinary working people, the poor, are having to pay the price of the scandal of the bankers gambling on the casino capitalism that they run. So as the rich continue to get rich, the poor are asked to pay the price through savage cuts in pay, benefits and public services. and never accept the argument that there's not enough money in society. We live in a very, very wealthy society. The richest 1,000 individuals, just 1,000 people in Britain, have seen their wealth increase to £520 billion over the last 5 years. So never accept the argument that there's not enough money in society. Even the richest 100 individuals in Scotland have a combined wealth of £25 billion. And at the same time, while the bankers were getting away with it, what were our politicians doing? Our politicians were boasting that they were cutting red tape. Our politicians were boasting that they were deregulating the markets to continue to let these chancers get away with it. At the same time, we had our political representatives, a number of them across all the parties at Westminster, caught with their noses in the troughs over their expensive scandals. So we were asked to pay to clear their duck houses and their moats and all the rest of it. And I don't know about you, I live in Adler, I brought up in Adler in this city, and I didn't know anybody who's got a duck house or has got a moat. Even if they did, the idea that they expect the taxpayer to bail them out on that is a scandal. What other job has a £67,000 a year salary, on top of that a number of huge expenses, who were then able to claim £400 a month food allowances on top of that? And let's remember, these are the generation of politicians who themselves all benefited from free education, who then said to your generation and more that we can't afford that anymore. Again, it's a disgrace. We also have a political system and a political elite that does not reflect ordinary society. The last cabinet of the Condems, made up of multi-millionaires, all schooled at Eton and Harrow, been to Oxford and Cambridge. When that cabinet met at Downing Street every single week, it was more like a school reunion than a cabinet meeting. That's the reality of the makeup of our existing politicians. And I think we've got to change that. And one of the principles that we're putting forward, that a number of socialist MPs in the past have carried, is that if elected, that we would live on the average skilled worker's wage. We think that that's a political principle. We think representing ordinary people, which means you should be living in the same sort of terms and conditions as ordinary people. It's far too easy, and far too often we've seen in the past, even well-intentioned politicians going into Parliament at Westminster claiming they wanted to change the world. And all they changed was their bank balance, their house and their car. That's got to stop, if we want a different type of society. If you think, and my final points are this, if you think that kids living in Scotland, that 1 in 4 kids live in Scotland is okay, then I would say to you to continue to vote for one of the main parties. If you think that our pensioners are scared to put on their heating every year while the private energy companies are making billions of pounds of profit, then continue to vote for the same parties. If you think that it's okay for the bankers and then their pals to continue to rake it in, continue to vote for the same main parties, because they support an economic system that this isn't about one rogue banker or a number of rogue bankers. This is inherent in the capitalist system itself. That's a natural outcome of that. So, if you want more of that, continue to vote for that. And what I would say is, if you want real change, if you want to see real change in society, then don't just vote, because real change never comes about just by voting every 4 or 5 years. Real change comes about when ordinary people like yourselves get out, get organised and campaign. And that's what's brought about every gain of the past, whether it's the right to vote, the right to belong to a trade union, the right to go on strike if you're a worker. All those gains of the past have been won through struggle. They've never been given to us from on high. And if we want to defend those things, if we want to change society, that means we need to get organised and go out and change that. Never expect politicians in Parliament to change things for us. We want a society that's based on the millions and not the millionaires. If we want a society that puts need before greed, then we need to get organised and we need to campaign to change that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much to all of our candidates, and I will open up the floor to questions immediately.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what would you do to protect some of the most vulnerable people in our society, that is, the homeless people? How would you support them and protect them?
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, how would our candidates seek to protect the most vulnerable in society,
Homeless people.
the homeless?
How would you support and protect them?
Right, so just homeless people you're asking specifically, right? Would you like several questions at once, or would you like to simply answer that one? You think? Oh, well, Chris, why don't you start?
Okay, actually just the other night we were talking about, we're at the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, This might surprise you, but the SNP the last 5 years has had a target to build 30,000 affordable homes. That's not the root of all homelessness, of course, but it's a step in the right direction. I've actually worked as a property financial advisor in the last 10 years, so I know a lot about where people have been with regards to trying to buy their first house. As an 18 to 24-year-old in the group you're in just now, it must be frightening to look at the market going forward and where you're going to begin. So your chances are you're going to be renting at the moment. What you really want to able is affordable homes. So 30,000 is our target. Over the next 3 years, we want to build, next term of the Parliament, it's 100,000 per year of affordable homes. Actually, we're the only party who's pledged that. Other ones have pledged hundreds of thousands of homes, but you'll find it's not about affordable housing. One of the key problems of homelessness that's happened in the last 5 years is the way the welfare state's been starting to be taken apart. Benefit sanctions, if any of you know what that is, that means if you don't turn up at your 60th interview that week for a job after endless cycles of different interviews for jobs that either don't exist or there's hundreds of people going for per job, if you turn up late, you get a 4-week penalty. That means you get nothing. In Dundee itself, we found people end up homeless as a result simply because benefit sanctions have been held for 4 weeks. Then when they go back after 4 weeks from struggling for family and friends to get support, they may end up for some other reason missing again. That means then 3 months. We've had a 400% increase in food bags, and that's an absolute tragedy in a society that's so wealthy. The one thing we learned about during the referendum is how wealthy Scotland is. So I would want to see an end to those benefit sanctions, and immediately. Those are the ones that are introduced from both the Tories and the Conservatives. Another insidious tax that's happened over the last 10 or more years started with Labour. It's called the bedroom tax. I'm sure you're all aware of it here. It started under Labour with private housing and was continued, as David Cameron said himself, it's a good idea, into other spheres of housing now that we've had the last 5 years. But we've seen an increase in homelessness as a result of that. Too often people, when houses were built in the 60s and 70s, they were built typically as 3 or more bedroom houses. People had larger families. So a lot of people are finding when they're trying to get accommodation just now, they're going for 2-3 bedrooms, because that's what's available in the market. Now, for any reason you need any support with regards to the work that you're in terms of getting housing benefit, if that's the case where you have a spare bedroom, you lose £14 a week. If you've got 2 bedrooms, it's £25 a week. And this is going on through the UK, so we would vote immediately to abolish the bedroom tax. The SNP has already done a lot in the last few years. It's mitigated against it throughout Scotland, so it's not affecting the same way. But it's £35 million it's costing per year, and as a result, that's money we would like to use, if we abolish it, to end fuel poverty, which is another scandal we have at the moment. So I hope that helps at the beginning. Thank you.
Well, on that note, perhaps, Nicola, you'd like to respond to that. You said in your some of your literature here that you'd like to cap welfare and control immigration. And so how are the Tories best placed to protect the most vulnerable in society?
I'm caring for in 2010 the rescue reforms not only just unaffordable, but it actually trapped people in poverty and created the culture of entitlement. So what we want to do is end self-fulfilling culture and create a system that is based on fairness, value for money and personal responsibility. I worked in the housing department in Dundee for a short time, and I was involved in actually doing work for the homeless strategy. And a lot of people that are found to be homeless are those that are coming out of prison. And what I would like to see is more work done with these people to break the cycle, so that they're provided with the education, new skills that will prepare them for the workplace, so that they when the first term is out, and this is, you know, how support framework and, you know, trying just to make that cycle. And education is really important to break down poverty. So really, education and a fair welfare system based on personal responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other candidates? Really, Jim?
I mean, that's, you know, if you talk about the needs of homeless, first of all, you have to accept that some of their needs are very complex. The people who end up homeless are suffering, usually, well, sometimes from mental health issues, sometimes from alcohol or drug issues and stuff like that as well. What hasn't helped is obviously the massive level of cuts that have gone on to support services that could have supported that. We've had 50,000 council jobs go in the last few years. Now, that's meant people like who work in homelessness services, people who work in housing services, people who work with people with addictions and mental health have seen those jobs gone just at a time when we've actually there's been an increased demand for that. So, you know, we need to invest in public services, we need to invest in those type of things that will help people on an individual basis. First of all, to get into housing and then to support them in, to be able to maintain, you know, a tenancy. But I think we need a massive programme of council housing building. You know, the idea that Tories back in the 80s sold off thousands upon thousands of council houses, supposedly on the idea of widening democratic ownership. The reality was, and you can see the figures recently, 1/3 of council houses that have been sold off are now owned by big business landlords, you know, who are then ripping off people at so-called market rents. And the whole issue about the bedroom tax, you know, I find it ironic that those who were in favour of the bedroom tax are actually opposed to a mansion tax. You know, it's just absolutely bizarre, the idea that somehow somebody living in a housing scheme in Ardler or Kirton or wherever having one spare bedroom is somehow a drain on society, yet a multi-millionaire living in a mansion with 25 bedrooms, you know, is some sort of benefit to society. And I was one of the main organisers in Dundee of the Bin the Bedroom Tax campaign, and I was very proud that the tenants who got organised in that, and we were able to win against this council the first no evictions policy in Scotland over the issues of the bedroom tax. But I think that the needs of the homeless are very complex, but it needs investment. These people are victims of our society. They are victims of the way that we run society, and you know, we shouldn't be shrugging our hands and saying, well, it's their own fault or it's people's own choices that have got them into that. You know, there's a collective responsibility there that we need to do something about that.
Thank you very much. Any other candidates want to jump on that?
Thanks, Pauline. I agree with a lot of what Jim says and Chris as well, in terms of, I think that homelessness, there's things that we can do in the longer term about building capacity, making sure that we actually have the housing stock that we need. But in the short term, I absolutely agree with Jim that people are finding themselves in these situations, obviously there's a set of complex needs. Frankly, the cuts to local government budgets, you know, there's been about £1 billion taken out of anti-poverty programmes across this country that are directly affecting those areas. We know that our social work departments are increasingly dealing with high tariff cases rather than people who we could do preventative work with to try and keep them out of some of these situations. And these things are, it's very difficult, but you know, a lot of what Jim McGinn says is right about this, about where the cuts have fallen. The cuts have fallen on the people who are the most vulnerable, and frankly that's just typical. And we need to do more to make sure we can get the right resources into local government to prevent some of those impacts which are perverse. I think actually on the bedroom tax, you know, as an economist, I think it's actually typical of, frankly, an economist trying to solve a social problem. The idea that actually you can change the use of housing by penalising people money, and that actually there's no social friction in that. Actually, you know, there are no social consequences to people making those moves.
So, sorry, Michael, are you saying economists are not the best people?
Absolutely, they're definitely not the best people to make those kind of choices. I mean, typically, you know, it's about the numbers and how you can drive social change by, you know, putting a price tag on something. Actually, there's the price tag of the social consequences of that. You know, is just far too high. Making people shift their families, you know, putting them through through the kind of the damage that can cause to people. So it's I think it's just an utterly iniquitous, crazy policy that's got to stop as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Pauline.
Yeah, I won't repeat too much what's already been said. Certainly, I agree with Jim that homelessness is multifaceted. I think it comes from addiction, it comes from welfare issues, it comes from unemployment, it also comes from abuse. And in the case of women, I think it's appalling that at this moment in time there's a campaign to try and save some of our women's aid shelters, because actually they're at risk of the cuts. And we don't even know where the Tory government is going to bring the axe down on another £10 billion of cuts if they get into government in the next round. So, I mean, I think we have to be mindful of, the austerity agenda. I think we have to be mindful that right now, and we have had for some time, I would argue, certainly since the early 1980s, we haven't got an economy that I think that actually doesn't serve society. And I think we need an economy whereby the economy serves society, not society serving the economy. And I think when you think that way, everything comes down to economics. And I go back to what Michael was saying. And very often then it's just about the numbers and it's not about the people. And equally, when it comes to homeless, the vulnerabilities of people that are homeless, are usually picked up with the voluntary sector. And it's the voluntary sector that are getting the axe cut in the austerity budget. Because actually what they do is not seen to be statutory services, so it's easy to cut them. So, at the end of the day, this is about how we spend our money. It's about whether we value people or whether we value an economic system that actually doesn't value people. And I would argue that we need to change the narrative around economics so it takes care of people and it takes care of the planet.
I think there's a bit of a worrying crisis of a consensus breaking out of the panel, which is unusual for politics. There's something, obviously housing is a devolved issue, but it's just as important as ever. One thing I think I've missed out, and it was something I pointed out on Tuesday evening when I went to housing hustings, and I think clamping down on tax dodging will help, because if we clamp down on tax dodging, we can increase our funds and actually put the money into housing, to build housing for people to stay in. And what I also think on taxes is you reduce the VAT to 5% on renovation and repairs to allow the houses to be built at a reasonable price, so actually we can afford to put people into them to rent at a reasonable price. Because if the 2% VAT, suddenly the rent's high up, and before you know it, we've got London prices, which is not any good to anybody. And on the bedroom tax, I know it was, and Pat, as I said, I stand on the coalition record because that's the party I'm in. But the bedroom tax, we've trialled and errored it. It simply doesn't work. It's something I would always vote to abolish. So that will certainly help people to afford the rent to keep in their housing. But also another thing that we, and it's something that I was surprised you mentioned it, Paul, because I agreed with you on Tuesday night when you said it, is a lot of people just buy land and leave it sitting there. I think actually a land value tax is quite a good idea on that, to tax them, because it's sitting there, it's gathering value, we can't build houses on it, we'll tax them on the value they're earning, and we have a bit more money to either buy it off them or put houses, decent houses, importantly, into other places that we could use.
That's a green policy.
Yes, it is, and I agree with it.
Well, we seem to be off to a fairly easy start. Let's see if we can make things a bit more difficult. Any questions from the floor? Yes, Self right at the back.
I'd actually like to ask a question to Nicola. I'd like to ask how you feel being a candidate for the party that has already caused so much pain and devastation to vulnerable people and their families.
Right. Do you remember when I talked about that easy start? Well, if I may rephrase that slightly, Nicola, the Tories have historically not been popular in Scotland, and certainly not with the student vote anyway. Why is this election for you? Why is this? Why are you going to turn the corner? How are you going to turn the corner now? Why is Dundee going to vote in a Tory MP?
Dundee is still face a massive economic regeneration that is a lot of fun, and so we've had unemployment levels have fallen, we're creating more jobs, there's been 3,000 more businesses created in Dundee West alone. So the Conservatives have been policies have been working for Dundee, and the Scottish Conservatives have reduced taxes for the video game industry, which has a direct effect on the Dundee economy. So I think we've started to see the results of Conservative policies, and to steer away from the plan would be a disaster for Dundee and the United Kingdom.
Marra?
I want to come back to Nicola. Nicola, you said that the Conservatives had created 3,000 small businesses in Dundee in the last coalition government. Yeah? That's what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, given that at the Scottish Parliament yesterday, with the exception of the Tories, it was universally agreed that TTIP is actually going to be fundamentally detrimental to small businesses. You know, why, if you're so proud of creating small businesses, are you then supporting TTIP that potentially is going to annihilate them?
The TTIP is, gives businesses the opportunity to trade with transatlantically, and there's opportunities that exist to create more jobs, more investment, and despite what some of the participants say, it doesn't threaten our AHS in any way.
Sorry, Jim was first there.
You know, you have to ask this question first of all, are Tory policies working and are they good for Dundee? Well, it depends what your aim is, because if your aim is, as the Tories is, which is to decimate public services, to drive ordinary people into poverty and to pay the price of the economic crisis, then from their point of view, their policies are working, because that's what it's about. There's no nice form of capitalism in my point of view. So that's working for them because they've got away with it. Their funders, big business, they've got away with it. It's not a recession, it's a robbery, and it's a robbery from the poor to the rich. So from their point of view, their policies are working.
Thank you. Chris.
I just actually want to touch on TTIP. Does everybody know what TTIP here is? There are a couple of other trade treaties, but TTIP is the transatlantic intertrade between the US and Europe. What's really frightening about this, and I think I'm speaking for most candidates here, is the secrecy that's going on behind this TTIP. It's been ongoing now for about 18 months, and it's where the European Union and the leaders of the European Union, which of course includes the coalition here in the UK, are behind closed doors discussing future trade treaties, which will affect all of us in the future. And Pauline's quite right in saying that small businesses will be adversely affected. Now in Scotland, 99.3% of businesses are actually small businesses. That means less than 50 employees. In the SNP manifesto, we've made it very clear that we want to see open and transparent discussions, and let's see what's been discussed so far with regards to TTIP, and that we would never support TTIP that would have an adverse effect on our public services. And what that means is, under this trade treaty that we've been looking at the moment, is that actually things like the NHS could have services bought up privately by big companies, and if they were ever to be renationalised, then your government could be sued, which is quite astonishing. So France has already asked for the exclusion on that, as is Germany, and so far, neither the Tories nor the Lib Dems, and not that I'm aware of the Labour either, has actually come forward and said enough's enough, because really that's the end game in terms of late capitalism, as it were, where TTIP takes over everything from your schools to your schools to your hospitals to your universities and to your public services. So we would be set not to be signing up to any trade like TTIP or anything like it if it's going to have an adversely affect on our society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can say enough's enough, because we've been saying that for the last 2 years in relation to this. We've been quite clear that we have to make sure that there are exemptions on within TTIP around health services in particular and public services. I think these kind of contracts or these trade agreements, TRIPS and the GATT and so on before it, have traditionally been negotiated in the kind of circumstances Chris talks about, with a lack of transparency and closed rooms. And that has to worry us all, I think, in terms of the impact they can have. I can't agree with everyone in terms of the general approach in terms of free trade. I mean, I think that free trade has had big benefits to our society globally. I know it's had negative impacts as well. When you talk about whether it be in the climate and otherwise, but without looking towards a means of getting economic growth back into our society, we're going to continue to be in the position where we have stagnation, where we can't make sure that we can deliver public services that people need. I don't think actually the Greens' kind of fundamental policy of negative or zero growth actually helps working people in this country. I don't think it's what people want. I don't think it's what people need. And it's as much as for the way that Jim describes it, we have to make sure that the profits and the proceeds of that are better distributed, and we have to get a democratic mandate to make that happen. I think that's just sensible politics. So I can't be kind of write off that the Labour Party or a Labour government will oppose TTIP in its entirety, but we have made very clear about where the red lines in that are, and we have done for a long time.
Yes, thank you. Daniel, I'll let you go first.
Thank you. Quick point. It's just say TTIP, it's something that I've had numerous emails about this week. It's anything, it's been this, that's been the most frequently raised thing in my inbox in the past 6 weeks. It's certainly not something I could support, if any risk of the privatisation of our public services in the space. But what I also think is there's another issue here, and that's freedom of information. We need stronger freedom of information laws. They can't be doing this sort of thing behind closed doors. It's a very liberal thing that we've tried to campaign for so long, that we need freedom of transparency, and the way to do that is a better freedom of information laws where we can request to see what these people are discussing to do with our money and our public services.
Right, we'll have one final point and then we'll...
Yeah, I just want to come back on Michael about his misconception about the Greens' approach to growth. The reality of the matter is we want growth within the limits of the planet. We want growth that puts people at the centre. We don't want growth at everything and everybody's expense. That's the difference, because the reality of the matter is we can't all hang around every day doing nothing. We need to be productive. We just don't need to abuse people, and we don't need to abuse the planet for the sake of increasing GDP, which increasingly we know is actually not a very good indicator of how well a society is doing. We know that at a certain point, that in the economy, GDP does not reflect how well a society is doing in terms of cohesion, in terms of mental health, in terms of wealth and happiness. So I wouldn't say it's zero growth. I think it's just being a little bit more aware of the impacts of growth and the fact that we have to do it within the limits of our planet.
Okay, thank you. More questions from the floor? There's one gentleman right at the back here.
Hi, Paul Smith, I'm a member of the Green Party. The question I've just been able to ask for a while, and it goes out to everybody. Why is it that just before a general election or a Hollywood election, all the other parties, apart from the Green Party, they all steal Green Party policy?
Which party did you say we were a member of again?
I'm a Green Party member, so I was able to speak. You can speak to me later about joining if you want to join. What this happens, and then after the election, they just drop them all. You hug a husky, and then you ring for the next 5 years, and that seems to be the end of it. I find it very frustrating. I'm coming from a green point of view, but I find it very frustrating.
Okay, Michael Marra, why don't you hug a husky as much as the Greens?
Yeah, I think that the track record. I mean, if you're talking about green policy and social policy, I'll maybe say something about climate change if that's okay, because I think one of my great frustrations actually over the last 3 and a bit weeks in this is that the discussions in this election have been about who can form a coalition with who's on, vote so and so, get such and such. I think it's been to the total absence of any kind of proper debate about the kind of country that we want to create, and I think that's a huge frustration. To the point that actually I would think that the way that France have got this, where they don't have opinion polls in the short campaign period, will actually allow us to talk about policies and issues. But if I can say about climate change, in a former job before I worked here, as I said, I was head of policy for Oxfam, and I was the lead lobbyist for Stop Climate Chaos Scotland when we were passing the climate change legislation in the Scottish Parliament. And we passed what was deemed at the time to be world-leading legislation. And we all patted ourselves on the back about that, and we went out and had a few pints, and we were pleased about it. And there was unanimity, or near unanimity, across the Scottish Parliament for that. And every year since, we've missed every single target that's been in that bill. And I was actually in Copenhagen at the climate talks that year, handing out this leaflet about Scotland's world-leading climate targets to people from developing countries who suffer the actual consequences of that. And I'm pretty ashamed now to have done that, to tell those people in those talks when they were actually fighting literally for their lives and the lives of their fellow country people, that we were doing this, and actually we've done sod all since that day, since that was passed. So I think that it's that kind of, a betrayal, actually, of the actions that we have to take. I share your frustration in that regard when people talk one side and then don't take the action. Because we knew it was going to be tough. We said it was going to be tough, and nothing tough has happened. I think it's a disgrace.
Thank you. Daniel?
I think I'd be a slight repel that I agree with the green policy earlier on in the evening. That's the reason I always say, it's just that we have had this too, as Liberal Democrats, people pitching our policies. I mean, especially the one we've had at the moment is what we have is the £8 billion increase on the NHS. The Tories suddenly promised after we have, and then they're trying to wear our clothes. And I agree with you, it's such a frustrating thing. But at the same time, I think what we need to put now is the new politics and end of petty politics. I'm perfectly happy to agree with other parties on policies. I think, that's actually quite good. Nothing frustrates me more when someone stands up and will vote against the policy purely because it isn't their party's. I think that's just not the way to go forward. What we need to do, especially now, because there is going to be a coalition government, sorry, Michael, there is going to be a coalition, we need to work together and accept other people's policies. And it's one that I accept was the land value tax. And that's the reason I think, and I'm not going to suddenly desert that if elected as an MP. Or indeed any other office, because it's something, yes, I think it's fair enough. So I think that's the reason that we need to look at ending petty politics and getting everybody's opinions in, because we can't just be marginalising any sort of opinion, because they're all valid. And I'm perfectly happy to work with any of the parties up here, because we're all pretty reasonable people. So that's the reason I think we can agree with other parties' proposals, because it's only fair, it's a democracy.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Jim, did you want to jump in on that? Well, I'm sorry. Fire away, Chris. Sorry.
Paul, that's
Next, Jim.
Paul, that's a really good question. A good question for the Green Party, because just last week in The Guardian, scientists were pointing out there's not enough being talked about in the Green Party manifesto for climate change. It's worth having a look at. But what I would say about thieving the policies, it's kind of rhetoric for all parties to say that, in all honesty. Because there is consensus on certain things. I don't think anybody wants to see climate change adversely affect any one of us, anywhere it is on the planet. Which is why in January, for example, the SNP proposed, along with the Greens in Scotland, actually a moratorium on fracking. So it was a joint effort there. Also, we have a couple other things. We're on track for 100% renewables in Scotland. We're one of the largest producers of renewable energy in Europe, and we soon will be the largest as a continuing track we're at the moment. There's a couple of other things here that I'm just reading at the moment, which is new to me. We're also going to call on the UK government to match the approach to the Scottish government with a dedicated climate justice fund. And lastly, we use our influence as the SNP's a strong team of MPs in London to push for a rapid carbon reduction at UK level, which is already what's happening at Scottish level. So I think the Greens and the SNP on that front actually share a lot more than we have in difference.
But since that legislation was passed, SNP have been in government and they have not met one single target in it. You're saying you're going to send these MPs to London to push other people on doing it, when at the time you voted for it, you said it would happen, and you've not done anything about it. Not one thing.
Just before I started, he said, she said, at the last vote on this in January, where was Labour on fracking?
Labour have been quite clear that we will have local referendums to decide whether people are
local referendums is not going to support.
I thought you were in favour of referendum. At every opportunity.
What you're actually saying is you're fudging on fracking. We've made it very clear to frack off with regards to this matter. I think the idea of fracking under people's homes is abominable. I think in a densely populated country like Scotland, to have in your backyard would be very unpopular. And as we've seen some of the evidence so far over in the US and elsewhere, it's proved to be both economically and environmentally disastrous.
That's great. So, but you're doing nothing to actually change the situation at the moment. No. So you're locking out future emissions, but you're doing nothing to reduce emissions just now.
Michael, I've just told you about a dedicated climate justice fund.
That's
climate
justice.
Gentlemen.
Sorry, if I can, to be fair, Chris, climate justice is nothing to do with reducing emissions. It's about mitigation.
Okay.
It's a completely different thing.
All right, let's leave it there. Pauline Hinchion, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I do want to come in because I'd like to explain to Chris why the environment and equality goes together. Because the reality is, the reason that we focus on issues around poverty is because the poorest people actually suffer worse under climate change. And I'm not just talking about poor people in Tibet or poor people in Africa. I'm talking about poor people in our communities here in Scotland. Because the reality of the matter is they're less likely to have insurance. And believe you me, when we start getting a lot more flash flooding and we start getting a lot more extreme weather, they'll be the people that will suffer because they won't have insurance. And equally, when we have droughts and we have extreme weather that actually impacts on food, it's poor people that suffer because they will not be able to afford the rise in food property. So in actual fact, ecology and equality fit very, very hand to glove as far as Greens are concerned. So to say that we have a manifesto that has little about the environment actually just shows that you don't understand the full implications of climate change.
All right, Jim, we'll take one final point from Jim and then we'll move on.
I don't know if I've taken anything from the Green Manifesto, but I'm willing to work with anybody on the basis of the common good. I'd agree probably during the referendum campaign with Chris and Pauline in the sense of our campaign for a yes vote. Well, my idea of an independent Scotland was probably very, very different, and certainly it was to Chris's in the sense of, I'm opposed to the power of big business, about how it distorts our society and the influence that has. If you just look at what happened in Grangemouth just in the last year or so over the whole issue of INEOS and its power. It's huge power. It's basically held the Scottish and British governments to ransom over the issue of jobs there. And then they're given the licences for the issues of fracking right across parts of central Scotland. Look at the power that big business has in the oil industry and stuff like that over Scotland. SNP used to talk about it being Scotland's oil. The reality is it's not. It's American multinationals' oil, and that should be publicly owned as well. I'm in favour of democratic public ownership. If Greens and others support that, then I welcome that. I've taken part in a number of campaigns over the years, and I've worked with people from different political parties. Myself and Pauline and Michael have been involved in the campaign to save Unionist High School. I worked with people from both the Labour Party and the SNP over the issue of the bedroom tax in the past, and would do so in the future on that. But if we're talking about really changing society, then what I would say is, we can't appeal to big business's better nature. because they didn't have one. Because their whole existence is to make profit and to maximise profit. And unless we challenge that power, they will continue to get away with it while paying lip service to the ideas of the environment, by changing their logos to make them look more green. And the reality is they're still raping the planet, and that's got to change.
All right, thank you. We have a question from the gentleman down the front here.
With Dundee University at £2.7 million deficit, what specifically would you do to support universities in Scotland?
Okay, so what would you do specifically to support universities in Scotland? Have you any particular favourite candidate that you'd like to answer that first? Or a least favourite?
Yes, education is a devolved issue at the Scottish Parliament. However, where the money comes from does not. It's under the Barnett formula. And I'll make it clear again. I made it very clear in the opening speech. There's three key things really when it comes to money. All three parties, the Tories, Labour and the Lib Dem, are signed up to further austerity. That's already after 5 years, which means another 5 years under fixed term Parliament. We've said we oppose this. We'd like to see £140 billion increase across the UK, not just in Scotland, which will help for things like health, education, housing, jobs, infrastructure and innovation. They're the key things. Secondly, made it very clear already that the renewal of Trident is a red line issue for the SNP. We do not want to see the replacement of Trident at £100 billion. Money at this point it could be spent very clearly on improving our universities and our schools and our colleges. And also, one other thing, Daniel just brought up about tax dodging, which I think is a very important thing which we haven't talked about so far tonight. We have a tax dodging bill which has already been introduced in Scotland as of last month under HMRC's small part of tax devolution in Scotland with Revenue Scotland. We would like to see that a whole tax reform happen throughout the UK. We have 1,400 taxes. You might wonder if that's normal. It's not. We have the highest level of different taxes. It's second only to the US in the world. Now here's another thing that we're second only to the US in the world. We're the world's second largest tax haven. We give away annually £130 billion. Now during the Labour government, and it's not just Labour I have to say, Michael, I'm not just on the pop at you, but consecutive governments, but in 1997 to 2010, we laid off 55,000 HMRC tax inspectors. We also set up a zero tax floor in HMRC building. Just to give you one specific example of what happened, David Hartnett was the head of HMRC. And in 2010, after 12 years battle, Vodafone was finally told they had a £12.2 billion bill to pay. Now the head of HMRC went out for lunch with Vodafone, a British company which was trying to tax avoid through Luxembourg, and agreed a bill of £2 billion. That means £10 billion was lost to exchequer.
All right, Chris, we'll give Michael a chance to respond there.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the question, actually.
It's about money.
Well,
It's actually about winning money.
but I think, Chris, if you talk about, you and I have got slightly different, opinions on Trident. You just said that you would spend the money on Trident on higher education there. Your party's also said it would spend it on defence, childcare, youth unemployment in colleges, welfare, schools and teachers, personal care, pensions, infrastructure, diplomatic missions, child poverty, scrapping the bedroom tax, exports and diversification and pensions. I think actually it's just a con, total con, that you can come here and say that that is what the solution to every problem. When it's your government, your party, that's in Holyrood making decisions about the budgets that this university and other parts of our education have to spend. Now, I'm not going to give an easy answer to that question either. Frankly, actually, in the last budget that the SNP government passed, universities proportionately got a pretty generous settlement, because our colleges have been decimated. 6,000 people applied to go to college in Dundee and were turned away. Basic people looking for skills, people looking to actually open up their opportunities in the jobs market. 850 young people applied for engineering and were turned away. And when we know that we're going to need 200,000 engineers across this country in the next decade. It's actually, none of these decisions, I don't say that they're easy, but I think that actually the kind of answers that Chris has given to this question is totally flippant. Because we can talk about Trident, we can talk about the moral rights and wrongs in that, but actually it's not a blank cheque to buy off difficult decisions and say that we've got a huge pot of money from tax evasion. Because we can get money from tax evasion, but you have to take responsibility for the actions that your government's taken and actually try and answer some of those questions. So if you want to have a go again and try and answer the guy's question about education, I think that'd be a great thing.
Well, on that note, when we come to the second place, on that note of tuition fees, I think it would be appropriate to ask Daniel and Nicola exactly what their views are on it, if I can put that as broadly as possible.
My views on tuition fees are the answer to the question.
So, Daniel, we'll start with you, and then we'll come to Nicola afterwards.
You want me to answer both of them? Okay, well, my views are, I stated that at the start, I'm against tuition fees. I think it's a great privilege to be here. Because the thing is it's free for me, but later on, hopefully when I get a good career and all the rest of it, I will pay tax to allow the next generation of people to come through. So it isn't free per se, but it is free at the time of point of use, just like the NHS, just like our schools. And that's the way it should be, okay? I agree with that, and I apologise and I'm ashamed of what the party did back 5 years ago. The £2.7 million deficit, a lot about deficits in the current climate. The reasons are, there are things we gave the tax to get the tax evasion bill down. We're right on track. We need to reduce some of it, but the thing is, you can't re-spend the same money. Once you spend it, you can't keep throwing it. You can't use all the money for tax dodging on this and then try and spend it again. We can't do that. So there are other ways to try and look at it. But the one else thing I think, this is just because I'm a student here, it's one feeling I've got and one feeling I've got from the student body at some points. Now I might get a bit, we'll see, but it's the President's salary, I must say, it's the President's, his name is, his salary seems to be ridiculously high. The Principal, my apologies, Principal's salary is ridiculously high when we're cutting members of staff. I think we can actually cut down on his salary slightly to keep our members of staff. I think that's the best way to do it. And we're going through now a reformation, and this is something that I think would be very detrimental to the university, as we're looking at reforming. Now, just because I'm a law student, I can use this as an example. We're going to be called the law division or the law sector or something along those lines. I'm sorry, but people don't come to a university to study in a sector. They come to study in a school. I think renaming our areas is going to be an absolute disaster. So that's one thing we can do to keep young people or anybody, because of course there's no age limit to education, to come here, is keep our prestigious names and promote Dundee as a whole. Because I think as a city, we could be a bit down on ourselves at times. It's a very Dundonian thing. Oh, look at the old way. But that's what we need to promote the city. And we'll get people coming here, more money will flow in the city. We have to keep it in here, in Dundee University.
Fantastic. Thank you. We'll come to Nicola and then we'll come to you, Pauline Hinchion.
Yeah, I decided that there seems to be more funding for colleges and universities. Students have more for the there needs to be a review of how our education system is funded. There's quite a lot of disparity between England and Scotland. The English students, they start paying their debt or their contribution to cover their education at £21,000, whereas in Scotland you start a job under just under 17 grand a year, you start paying back your loans. So that is, creates also be a drop in students come from private backgrounds. The bus fares have been cut, and there's less people from good private backgrounds. Also, certain colleges means that access to university and for their education is limited. I know when I first started at this university, I found it very enjoyable with so many mature students. other children today, and there's not some lucky people listening. So, we need due to the funding to try and make Dundee educational institutions work for the people of Dundee and beyond.
Thank you. Pauline Hinchion, what exactly are the Greens going to do to protect our higher education institutions?
Well, because we believe education is a fundamental right, we actually believe that not only should tuition fees be free, but actually a citizen's income should be paid to students. It is not, increasingly, coming back to that question and linking it to yours, basically, the reason that there's a cut is because the universities are seen as being part of the public service, and therefore, as part of public services, they have to get the cut. What's interesting is where the cut falls. That's within the parameters of the university. And I think it comes down to things like, what the ref values and doesn't value in terms of where the money goes in terms of grants. I think it comes down to running a university like a big business, so you have very big principal pay, and I agree with Daniel on that one. I think it also, though, comes back to the issue of immigration and asylum control, and the fact that even though education is within the control of Holyrood, immigration and asylum is within control of Westminster, and it has completely clamped down on student visas, which actually impacts on the income coming into universities. So it seems a very simple question, but actually it impacts on so many different aspects of the way it's run. But because we actually see it as being a universal right, we actually think that it should be properly funded, we actually think that students should be properly funded, and actually we are against excessive salaries, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. People need to have a salary that is only 3, 4, 5 times maximum the average wage within that institution. So, yeah, it's a number of different things. But I think university hands are tied by they're not able to bring in extra income because of asylum, but they're also being whacked by the fact that they're part of the austerity budget because they're part of the public service.
Thank you. Jim, how exactly does that differ from Socialist Coalition policy?
But first of all, there's a number of points that have been raised. First of all, I want to say, I give full support and solidarity to the striking UCU members who've been defending their jobs. Threatening their jobs is obviously impacting then on what can be delivered at this university. So, I give full support to them. We'll take strike action next week again in defence of those jobs. And I think we need to also say that look at the effects of austerity so far for graduates. I read a figure from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation that was proposed just recently, which said that 5% of low-paid workers in 2003 had a degree. In 2013, that figure had risen to about 14% of people in low pay. That's the reality on a day-to-day basis for people that coming out of higher education, further education and stuff like that. And the point for me is always this: it's about political priorities. It's about political priorities and the type of system that we live in. So if we have a political system that doesn't value that, then that's what happens. I think we need a debate and a discussion, and I've not got a magic wand here about that, because I think the best place people to defend jobs and services and to defend what's promoted at universities are people like yourselves. It's the students and the staff in the universities who can lead a campaign to defend what they've got, and if they do that and they lead on that, then they have my full support to defend that. And the other thing is, I think we need a debate about the influence and the role of big business in some of our universities, particularly amongst the pharmaceutical industry, who seem to fund a lot of the research, which they then get a huge benefit out of from that. And where does where's the payback for the universities and for the students in that? Again, just think if we could avoid that duplication, that waste that goes on of private industry getting the benefits of all that, and that was used for common good and for the good of the wider society, how that could be used and utilised, that we should then be invested in our universities.
Okay, Michael Marra, one finally, very brief point,
just
and
very
we'll
quick.
take another question.
Very quickly, we know that actually graduate debt or student debt is in Scotland is the highest in the UK outside London. It's actually growing at a faster rate than anywhere else in the UK, including London. And I think that we have to take some kind of... We also know that the admissions from poorer backgrounds to university are worse in Scotland than they are anywhere else in the UK. So I think these are fundamental problems that we need to look at seriously, and part of what we're doing for that is through a banker's bonus tax, adding extra money into student support so that we can actually get increased amount of bursaries for people who are entitled already to make sure we can reduce the impact.
Okay, we'll wrap it up there. We'll take another question from the floor. We'll take a lady this time, you at the back. So was the independence referendum a once-in-a-generation occurrence?
It's a very good question. I think it was Nicola Sturgeon who actually said that at the time. However, Scotland's changing very dramatically in the last 6-7 months. And as you probably noticed in the polls, they've been very consistent. And what's really happened as a result of the referendum is everybody is very much engaged in listening to politicians and what they've got to offer, and also looking forward to this general election. This general election is not about a referendum. This is about having a strong voice for Scotland in Westminster for once, and that is what's been reflected in the polls. For there to be a second referendum, which hopefully is coming out of your question, that would depend on you and everyone else in here. It's not for anybody on this table or any politician for that matter. But what I can say is this: the poll, the last poll I saw, which was in the Guardian, showed that 51% now supported independence, and the Daily Record it was even higher. So there is a general direction towards people warming and supporting the idea of Scotland being independent in the future.
All right, I think we'll leave that question there. We'll move on for another one. Tim, you had a question?
Yeah, my question's to Daniel. So I'm not afraid to say that in 2010, if I could have done, I would have voted Liberal Democrats, and I was disappointed when Jewish views were raised. However, do you not think it's time for Liberal Democrats to grow back votes, not trying to cozy up to other political parties? And ask for people.
Well, we went into coalition, right? I accept we went into coalition. Now, I've got to say, if the party on my left go into coalition, will be treated the same way. I don't know, so sure. But I want to. Yes, but hold on. We went into coalition with the Conservatives. Now I know that often people are trained by that, but the reason is because Conservatives have the highest number of seats and the highest number of votes. It's the democratically correct thing to do, and I'm afraid it is the democratically correct thing to do when you have the most votes and most seats. The inherent problem for me is the voting system. However, what we've learned our lessons. Now, this is our first time in government. We were formed in 1980 something. I think it was 87. It's our first time in government. We've learned. Put points forward. We've got success. We've had points, unfortunately, which happens to be our biggest pledge, unfortunately. Which is very shame. And I would tell you what, it will not happen again. We've learned our lessons in coalition, but we believe in a coalition. That's another point. The Liberal Democrats. With any party, I would go to coalition. I would go to coalition with the Greens, because it depends who's the democratically right thing at the time. It changes all the time. But for me, the inherent problem is the voting system. First past the post is not correct. Okay, we need to go into STV. Now, the thing is, as I'm not a Conservative, I'm not an SNP supporter, I'm not a whatever, but I'm happy to work with other people. And they're happy to work with me, I hope. And that's the way it needs to be. It's not necessarily cozying up, but we will stand firmer in government, okay? I understand we've only given away on one broken promise. It was one, there's apparently a list of them, and I've only ever managed to find one. Okay, the one that we broke. I appreciate it's caused a lot of problems, but it's not something that I will ever support. Now in Scotland, we've done well enough to try and defend this. I appreciate it's going to be a hard time, but it's not a case of, I know it's not jumping into bed. It's not like that. It's just what's democratic. I can work with any of the people here because they're all reasonable people. Conservative, Green, whoever. Obviously, there are certain cases I will not work with people because they're far too right-wing. That's just ridiculous. But that's where I stand on that.
Can I just want to come back
All
to...
right, we're going to leave that question of tuition fees now, because that has now been covered several times for the Lib Dems.
I just want to come back to Daniel, which is that we know that you're anxious to go into coalition again. You don't seem to be particularly fussed about who your partners might be. But I'm going to ask the question that woman asked. Is PR referendum a once-in-a-generation thing?
Well, this is going to shock a lot of people now. It might shock people, I'm not sure if you know. I voted yes in the referendum, okay? So it's not anything. Okay. Yes, the reason you're asking me is my party have come out. I agree. If the people of Scotland demand a referendum, they should get one. That's democracy. The AV referendum, we won't be bringing back AV. I can tell you, PR, yes, we will bring it back. Hopefully through this Parliament. If not, certainly in the future.
Is it on your manifesto?
All right, Jim, a quick point from you.
Somebody said about the democratic thing. For me, the democratic thing is to have political principles and to stick to them.
I think that's fairly conclusive. We'll take another question.
So we've heard a bit about the Barnett formula, but I'm wondering where the pure parties stand on it, and if you realise how badly underfunded it leaves places in the UK like Wales, when places like Scotland and England are highly overfunded.
Yeah, so the question, if you're in here, is, I think the contention was that the Barnett formula results in higher spending in Scotland but lower underfunding in Wales and parts of England. I mean, I think that what Scotland has done over the last 30 odd years has made a large contribution to the UK exchequer through territorial waters in terms of oil revenues. But what we find at the moment is when the oil price is low, that actually it's the broad shoulders of the UK that allows that public spending to remain high. So, you know, it's £1,200 a head higher in Scotland than it is in parts of England. I can understand actually there would be people, particularly I think in the north of England, who would look at that and be resentful of it. But what we've been quite clear with is that we have to protect the Barnett formula. We have to make sure that we can keep the spending, because if the oil price goes back up again, we'll be again contributing a higher amount to it. So the thing to chuck into the pot here is obviously this issue about full fiscal autonomy, which is the SNP's policy, one that said they will pursue within a year, which we know is going to result in a minimum hole of £7.6 billion in the public finances in Scotland, because the oil price is low, because we know that actually we spend more than actually we raise in our domestic tax situation. I mean, if you're talking about austerity, it's austerity max.
Any other candidates like to jump in on that?
I would like to jump in that, if that's okay. The Barnett formula was actually set decades ago, and it's probably long past its sell-by date, not just for Scotland but for the rest of the UK as well, which is why places like Wales may well be underfunded, and it's something that Leanne Wood's brought up in a recent debate, in fact. We would like to see that change. In terms of Scotland's wealth, it really grinds my gears when I hear politicians or candidates keep talking Scotland down. In the last 34 years, every single year, we've put more money into the exchequer than we've ever received. Even if our public spending is higher, we're still putting in more. So just to clarify that matter. In terms of the 7.6 billion black hole that you keep hearing from the Labour Party as they spin in circles about the mansion tax and how it's going to pay for everything, I'll be very clear about it. We're currently in 2015. Next year you'll see some of the tax raising powers that were brought forward in the Coleman Commission. Now that wasn't within 1 year, that was in 2009. We would like to see full fiscal responsibility debated and brought in the future, but it will take a number of years. And oil prices are low right now. But one of the problems with this 7.6 billion black hole they keep talking about is it does not take into account the 15 billion revenues increase over the next 5 years. It does not take into account that we've got the fiscal levers over economy to grow our economy, and it does not take into account that like prices go down in oil, they also go up. Thank you.
So, Chris, it's in your manifesto this year, right? On Thursday, we'll have to vote to decide whether we have full fiscal responsibilities being called now. So the idea that we should just kind of dismiss that because you don't think it might happen for years to come, when Nicola Ross already said there's going to be a debate. Why is it in the manifesto if you don't intend to do it, if you think it's going to go some point in the future? And if I can say on the growth figures, the idea that we're going to use growth and the levers in Scotland, the growth figures you propose have never been achieved by any economy in human history anywhere. It's utterly ridiculous to say that you can plug the gap. And you think that at the moment, all the economies internationally, why aren't they doing the things that you're suggesting to turn their economies around? It's like a magic button you can press.
Okay, so just to clarify, on the first issue with regards to Scotland's wealth, once again, Scotland is a wealthy nation.
Yes.
Out with of oil, we're 99% of the UK GDP. So even if I had no oil tomorrow, we'd still be the same wealth as the UK. In terms of the numbers that Michael was quoting from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, it's the same Institute of Fiscal Studies that said that if the numbers for cuts are coming from the Labour Party are completely vague. And just to touch on the point about introduction, last night Bernard Ponsonby was interviewing Jim Murphy about full fiscal responsibility and saying, does your party support it? The answer was no, neither do the Tories or Lib Dems. So we have a really difficult time, and it should be in our manifesto because
it doesn't sound powerful.
Sorry, let me finish, Michael, please. It should be in our manifesto because it's our principle and it's what we believe in. It's about Devo Max and bringing power back to Scotland over economy in order to help create jobs as well as wealth.
So you tell us you want to send these MPs to London to wring concessions out of Paris, but you're saying the stuff in your manifesto you have no interest in.
No, we are very interested in it. It's your party and the other major parties in London.
So it doesn't sound like much of a concession if you can't get any other parties to agree to it.
Well, as I said to you, your own leader last night said it very clearly your party would never agree to it.
Yeah, we don't agree to it.
Well, I'm just trying to make my point. It is in a manifesto.
All right, we'll move on there. Jim McFarlane, does the Barnett formula need review?
You know, the whole point of this is about tinkering at the edges, whether it's the Barnett formula or anything else. You know, that whole issue of, you know, whether people say, well, services are overfunded in Scotland. Well, first of all, I would say, well, where? Because who's benefited from that? Because if that's the case, why is it that 1 in 3 children in Glasgow live in poverty? Why is it that life expectancy for males in parts of Glasgow is lower than some places in sub-Saharan Africa? So we shouldn't buy into that. This is the whole point of it. The nub of austerity. As soon as we accept the idea that there's no alternative to austerity, what you have is different groups played off against one another. So they'll say, don't cut the funding in North England, go and cut it in Scotland because they're too much. You fall into the trap of the likes of Farages of the world who love to play that idea of playing off different communities against one another. So it then comes down to when in council funding, don't cut our school, go and cut another school. That's the whole point of that whole idea, buying into the agenda of austerity and the need for cuts. You know, as I said right at the beginning, I'm opposed to all cuts because I don't accept there is an economic need or a political need for that. There's enough wealth in society. It's about how we control that. It's about how democratically we run society and in whose interests we do that. If we don't change that type of society, then of course those type of issues will continue to linger on over Barnett or any other issue. And I think, you know, I have as much as common as a working class person in Liverpool and Manchester as I do with somebody living in Dundee or Glasgow. And I have as much difference with people like the Brian Souters or the multi-millionaires who fund some of the other parties in Scotland as well, regardless of their views on independence.
All right, I think we'll leave that there. Do you have a question? No, this young lady here.
Many people are facing the option of heat or eat, and Dundee are now showing high levels of fuel poverty, and I think it was you, Jim, that mentioned fuel poverty. I don't think any of you mentioned energy, and a lot of people are just facing 10% of fuel poverty now. It's over 40% in this class of super fuel poverty. I want to know how you guys are going to tackle it, because it's not just the multiple deprivation and people that are facing it, it's now everyone that's facing it. So I'm just wondering what you guys are doing for energy and tackling fuel poverty.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Again, another one I think that's been quite neglected in this debate so far, as we hear about opinion polls instead. I think that what we're proposing is that we freeze energy bills, but on the basis that the market is completely broken. We know that the big six energy companies, when prices are high, put the prices up. When prices are low, like they are at the moment, then the cuts aren't passed back. We also say that people who are over 75 should legally be placed on the lowest possible tariff. And I think there's scope to increase that over time as well. But we have to change the way the market works, because actually it just doesn't work in any regard. It doesn't provide a basic human need at a level that's affordable. So we need to actually regulate it and make it work properly.
Nicola Ross, you in your literature have spoken about protecting pensioners. Why are the Tories the best party for doing that?
Because the increase of national state pension by 2.5% or both wage and inflation rates. So that will always mean that pensioners income protect at a sustainable level. We have promised to protect our pension benefits such as free bus passes, the fuel allowance, toll-fare payments. We also believe that I like to work hard and build a good life for ourselves, so to enjoy those days, and to different pensioners flexibility to choose how they use their pensions. And Conservatives are well patient after the interest of pensioners, so.
Jim, you want to respond?
I mean, I think it's a great question because it comes to the nub of what type of society we live in. You look at even how these energy companies exist. Why is it the poor that have to pay the highest tariffs? Why is it the poor who are on the carbon meters that they have to pay the highest tariffs? I've had a concrete example. Just last year, one of my neighbours who works, as we're talking about people in work poverty, worked for a well-known supermarket in Dundee. Who came home from work after finishing a late shift, and she has a card meter because that's the way she was able to budget. She came home to find that her emergency supply had run out. This was at 10 o'clock at night. The nearest place that she could have went at that time to charge that was a 24-hour garage, which was over 2.5 miles away from where we lived. That was the reality, and that was what faced her at that time of night, to walk that distance because she had no money left, because it's that old saying of, by the end, there's too much month at the end of the money, because it was still too long for payday for that person. And that's not, they're not isolated incidents. That's what's happening to people on a day-to-day basis. And I've heard some people talking about, curb the profits or somehow be able to regulate the market. But the point is, the market doesn't work. And the market will never work, because what is it there for? It's there to maximise profits for a tiny number of shareholders for their dividends. And they're there to bunch up to boost their profits. The idea that we claim to have choice, that all you've got to do is shop online to change your supplier, they act as a cartel. That's how they operate. And the only way, in my opinion, that we can challenge that and change that is to bring them into democratic public ownership. Those companies that were privatised, and some of the time actually get a higher subsidy now than they ever did when they were actually publicly owned. That's the ridiculous situation of that. And again, we need to challenge that and change the power of that.
Okay. Chris, very brief final point, and then we'll move on.
Just to answer your question directly about eating choices in Dundee, it's facing us across the UK, in fact. In Scotland, the SNP in their manifestos have pledged to abolish the bedroom tax, which is costing the Scottish Government £35 million a year. That £35 million a year will go directly to eliminating food poverty in Scotland. That's a pledge straight away. Secondly, in terms of the fuel companies, they're regulated under Ofgem. And Ofgem has proved to be rather lax. Sorry, can you not hear me, Paul? Ofgem has proved to be rather lax when it's come to regulating energy companies. When the prices go up, they go all quickly together. When they come down, it takes ages for that to be passed on. What we've suggested is two things: that there should be representation both at the UK and Scottish Government level in Ofgem, and secondly, that Ofgem should have the powers to put penalties on energy companies that do not pass on these savings when wholesale prices come down immediately.
Okay, well, it's a question over here, this gentleman.
You have to let me come back on the question about energy efficiency.
Yes, 30 seconds. 29.
I won't bother then.
Oh, the audience has spoken.
I'm sorry, but I mean, to me, energy efficiency and eating or heating your house is far too important to actually try and get a question and an answer in 30 seconds, because it is about slashing emissions, it's about a massive energy efficiency programme, it is about creating jobs through that programme, it's about transitioning to a decarbonised economy, it's about having local energy companies run by the public service sector actually generating money to pay for services. It's so much bigger than a 30-second, but I still did it anyway.
Great. Right, we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to take as many questions as possible. And this gentleman here.
Just a simple question, specifically for Dundee. What are your specific issues that I can take home as a Dundonian today from you that says I can look forward to X, Y, or Z in your terms of meaningful job creation, not vague promises about vanity projects and spin?
All right, we'll have one policy each. Daniel, you haven't gone first yet. Not to put you on the spot.
The best thing I think we can always do is stop putting our own city down. We've got lots to be proud of in Dundee, and I think the best thing we can do is promote ourselves internationally to encourage people to come here, to live here, and take jobs here. The one thing, now I've always said, Luton to London is what Edinburgh is to Dundee. We can always say we have access, and we will actually, because we'll have an Amsterdam flight, an international airport very close to Dundee. Encourage people to come here, take the jobs here, and stay here, and actually create jobs that way, because we'll have more money coming into the economy when they come to stay here. Promote your own city, or the city you've come from for university. It's a fantastic city. I'm very proud to have lived here for 19 years.
All right, okay, we'll leave it there. Michael?
Yeah, if I can find you at the end, sir, I'll give you a copy of my plan for jobs, which was I published yesterday. The heart of that is about the need to get decommissioning jobs from the North Sea into Dundee. There's 1,000 of them going to sail past next summer on the way down to Hartlepool. And the way to do that partly is to bring the port that's run by Ford Ports back into local ownership. And I think that can unlock the kind of investment we need to bring these blue-collar, high-quality, well-paid jobs to Dundee.
Who wants to go next?
If you've not heard the city deal before, the SNP is currently working on, and hopefully it's going to be successful with Dundee and Perth, to bring £300 million, which will be £100 million per year, starting in the second year of Parliament, to help develop infrastructure in Dundee, which is badly needed, including things such as transport. Thank you.
Nicola.
About the past season, the last foundation made the handling for person jobs in Scotland. We are aiming to create another 200,000, and we hope to see jobs in Dundee. Is a lot of, the waterfront, the video game industry, and so that's how, I see us going forward. I had sustainable economic growth throughout the UK to back up what's happening in Dundee. So, and I believe that the Conservative Party under David Cameron is the only way to secure that economic growth.
Thank you. Pauline, you proved that you can answer a question in 30 seconds, so we'll give you 25 this time, just to make it interesting.
Okay, what can Dundee do? Well, first of all, it can be at the front of becoming more greener and showing the world and how you can become a greener city. we can actually do, as Michael says, which we believe in, which is to try and start decommissioning the old carbon fossil fuel energies that we currently have in Scotland. We can certainly start making better use of the fact that we're a solar city. We get more sunshine than anywhere else in Scotland by looking at creating solar parks. And I think we can certainly do more with energy efficiency, because we do have 1 in 4 people living in fuel poverty in Scotland, and that will create jobs, or sorry, in Dundee, and that will create jobs.
Thank you.
I'm going to answer this in a way of, I don't think there is just a Dundee solution here, and I would be interested if somebody thinks there is a magic wand that we can move to Dundee, because everybody will put through their wee wish list. They'll get elected or not get elected, and they'll get forgotten about, because that's what the politicians from the main parties, actually do most of the time. So the number of things I would say is, let's stop the cuts. £30 million worth of cuts are promised in Dundee City Council over the next 2 years by the SNP Council. Let's stop that cuts. That's on top of the 18 million that we've had over the last 2 years. Let's build a campaign that can win back that money that's been stolen from this city and use it in this city for social need.
Okay, thank you very much. We have exactly 5 minutes left, so we'll try and get through as many questions as possible. JB, I believe you're next.
Yeah, we've heard some very inventive use of maths, and I'd like to ask the groups in front of us, with so many wonderful promises of things to give your voters, where does the money realistically being quite a key word, actually going to be coming from?
Okay, well, on that point, I believe Greens and trade unions have promised a minimum £10 minimum wage.
Yeah, that's correct.
Wonderful news. Where on earth does that money come from?
Okay, I'll tell you where it's going to come from, and it's going to answer that man's question as well. Right now, in Scotland, we actually pay £11 billion to subsidise people in supermarkets working on the minimum wage. Now, what that says is that, first of all, is that the government is acknowledging that the minimum wage, you can't live in it. Secondly, it's subsidising employers, and it's telling employers it's okay to actually pay the minimum wage. And thirdly, actually, it's 11 billion that we could do with in our public services.
Okay, Jim.
Let's look at the reality of it. I'm campaigning for a £10 an hour minimum wage now, not in the future, because I think we need a society that can deliver that, because it provides a basic standard of living for everybody. And if you look at some of the international examples, just look at even in the belly of the beast of American capitalism, where a socialist was elected in Seattle just over 2 years ago. Seattle now has a minimum wage of $15 an hour, and that movement has spread to a number of cities across the US. Now, if that type of society can afford to pay that, then I think we can afford to pay that. Number of ways how that money can be raised: the £120 billion that's evaded and avoided by big business every year. A tax on the £540 billion or the £520 billion that's sitting in the bank vaults of the rich doing absolutely nothing, for every single day. That type of wealth in society. It comes back to this idea, which I'll always argue, is that we live in a wealthy society. And if we claim that we can't afford to provide decent wages, if we can't provide decent jobs for people, if that type of society and system, if people are trying to defend that system, then they're defending planned poverty, because that's what it is. If we want to change that, we need to change the society.
Okay. Michael Marra, Labour have promised £8 minimum wage. This is more realistic than 10?
Well, yeah.
All right, moving on.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is a question about just kind of realism in this. I mean, I would love to be in the position where I think we can get to £10. What I do know is that working people in this country haven't had a real terms wage rise in more than a generation, in 25 years, and we need to do something about that. We need to make sure that we can raise the minimum wage to a point that people can live on it, and where we're not subsidising the poverty wages. And I do think there is slack in my ability to do some of that. I think on the bigger spending promises that you talk about, there is a question there about how realistic it can be, and I know that a lot of people are very cynical at the moment about politics generally. I mean, that's there's good reason for that, about expensive scandals and so on that people have talked about earlier on. I think actually what we've promised in our manifesto is realistic. We've under-promised, and I hope that we can over-deliver. We've said the things that we're going to spend money on, the small and relative small increases in public spending, specifically tied to tax increases. I mean, I was, you know, kind of, we talked about imitating policies earlier on. You know, Alex Salmon said about 3 weeks ago there'd be no tax rises at all under the SNP, and then a week later they cut and pasted all the tax rises out of the Labour manifesto and put them into their own. Now that's great, you know, because actually if we can build a consensus about the need for progressive taxation to pay for some of the services we need, then I think that's a good thing.
All right, Chris, I'll let you respond to that. How big of a minimum wage are SNP promising?
Yeah, over the next term in Parliament, we seek to increase it a decent wage, which would be £8.70. But actually, what we're looking also to do, before I talk about wider economics and where the money comes from, on the living wage, we want to get, we've already started to get employers signed up on the living wage. To increase that, what we've decided to do is the employer, as well as the employee, pays a share of national insurance contributions. For the employer, that starts at £2,000 of your income. So the SNP has made its manifesto to increase that to £6,000.
But on the powers,
hang on, let him
against
finish.
it,
Michael, let
me finish. So that would mean that increased allowance could be passed on to create a living wage. In terms of the wider economy, where three parties have said a couple of times now we're tied to austerity. I would like to ask Michael where these cuts are going to come from, but regardless, Nicola Sturgeon talked at the University College of London and the London School of Economics, and she put forward a very prudent plan, and that plan is to increase our spending by 0.5% GDP, which works out roughly 140 billion. Now, just to give you one specific example, which would be with regards to the NHS, that would allow for investment in public services. The NHS would result in an additional 9.5 billion above inflation across the UK by 2021.
Okay, Chris, can we
just finishing? And that would mean a 24 billion in total. And this will deliver a total increase for NHS Scotland of £2 billion.
Okay, Chris, we need to move on to Daniel and Nicola, and I hope you guys realise that you can significantly shift this debate towards your favour by simply saying a bigger number than 10 for the minimum wage. So, Daniel, £25 minimum wage? That's incredible!
No, I believe I've campaigned for a lot of years, especially in the Scottish Parliament, for a living wage. The minimum wage was meant to be what any person can live on. It's fallen behind. It should be legislated to such that it will be a living wage. I'm pretty sure, if I've got my stats right, that DUSA here do pay a living wage, and it quite clearly works because we have our employees here able to actually get a decent living actually while they're studying. So that's a good thing, and that's what I think we need to legislate for more. And the biggest thing I agree is the clamp down on tax dodging. And that's what we need to do. That's where money can come in from to fund our public services. And when people have got more money, they'll spend more. VAT intake will also increase. So that's just a bit of basic economics I've always found. Quite good.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Nicola, a final point from you, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap things up.
Okay, on the minimum wage, the Conservative slightly different approach from our industry parts. We want to encourage companies to pay the living wage, and we're going to do this by offering a one-off discount on their business tax contribution. And we probably most part of it has outlined how we're going to get our money. 6 billion on aggressive tax avoidance and cutting down on tax evasion. 12 billion on reforming government departments and continuing to reform the welfare state, and that's how we're going to cut the deficit, and that totally start paying off its debts and ensuring that we can be in a position so that whatever has happened in the last 5 years should not happen again.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We can't take any more questions. My apologies to those of you whom I didn't get to. Can we please have a round of applause for our candidates? So I hope this has shed a little bit of light on things. Maybe you're much more confused. Either way, it's desperately important that you do vote, otherwise you don't have a voice. So thank you so much. Remember, you can follow along on social media with the hashtag DUSA Vote on Twitter. I think there's a Facebook page as well. But thank you very much for coming, and we hope you have a pleasant rest of the evening. Thank you.